What can we do to fight back against big pharma and the compromised medical industry? We can become healthy and break free from the perpetual cycle of being poisoned by criminal organizations like most pharmaceutical companies. Come check out what may be the most powerful antioxidant known to man, C60 PurplePower. The benefits of C60 have been personally outstanding. I use it every day and I feel incredible. I have tons of energy, I sleep great, and I haven't even come down with a cold since I started using C60 over 2 years ago. You can even get C60 for your pets. Do your own research, click the link in the description, and check out their website. If you order from that link or use coupon code KNOWLEDGE10, you get 10% off your order plus free shipping. What is your health worth to you? Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Nick Redfern. First, a couple of announcements. Check out our website, forbiddenknowledge.news. It's the home of the Forbidden Knowledge Network, where you find some of your favorite podcasts from our community featured. Forbidden Knowledge News is always available on Rokfin, Odyssey, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. Check out Rokfin. This is where you get all our premium content, as well as all the premium content from every creator on Rokfin for only $10 a month. You just go to rokfin.com/FKN+. That's ROKFIN.com/FKN+ to sign up now. Today I want to welcome Nick Redfern. He is a full-time author and journalist specializing in a wide range of unsolved mysteries, including Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, UFOs, government conspiracies, abductions, and paranormal phenomena. He writes regularly for the London Daily Express newspaper, 40 Times, Fate, and UFO magazine. He also travels and lectures extensively around the world. Nick, welcome. How you doing?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Yeah, man, it's so great to have you. I'm glad we're finally able to do this. Even though it is over the phone, it is better than nothing, so I appreciate you taking the time, and I've definitely been looking forward to this. You are one of my favorite authors. I've been looking to get you on the show for a long time, and the universe actually brought you to me, which is amazing. And even more amazing is we will be discussing your latest book, How Antigravity Built the Pyramids, the Mysterious Technology of Ancient Superstructures. This is one of my favorite topics to get into as well, the megalithic mysteries of our ancient past and all the incredible possibilities surrounding these structures. This is your first time on, though. I'm super stoked. For the audience that may not be familiar with you, just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what led you to write this book.
Well, over the years, or decades, I should say, I've had a lot of interests in various different subjects. One of them is the UFO subject, and cryptozoology, which is the study of unknown animals, and also aspects of sort of ancient mysteries. So I pretty much sort of go into all of those various categories. And but I always try and come up with something new every time. I think it's better than just recycling an old story or that kind of thing. So that's where it's put me with the latest book. So.
Right on. Well, that's just wonderful. Let's get into the book. Can you give us a synopsis of what you're focusing on here?
Well, yeah, basically, the book is a look at how massive, huge blocks of rock and stone could have been created, and particularly, even more incredible, how it could be moved for huge distances on the ground, on really difficult ground like sand and things like that. And how could it be achieved? So that means that there's a way to do it, or there was a way to do it, but we today don't really have a sort of a key understanding how people thousands upon thousands of years ago could achieve things that we could do, that we cannot do and couldn't do, in the present time. So the big question is, why is it that if people living in the world sort of 6,000 years ago, 7,000 years ago, were able to achieve these things, these incredible stones, being put upright and moved around over a really sort of rough land, how is it that we cannot do it now? And so there's something back to front.
Yeah.
And so with the story, I first heard this story probably round about, I would say about 5 or 6 years ago. I mean, there've been rumours about, going back a few years and decades, of civilizations before ours who could find a way to raise massive stones. But they just talked about it as levitation or antigravity, and they didn't expand upon it. And most of the time, the stories came to like to a halt. And I thought, well, why not go back to this and really to try and sort of nail the story to the wall and get as much material as possible. So that's basically the key issues are: who were the people who were able to do this? Now, were they extraterrestrials, or could it have been an ancient human civilization that at some point was lost or disappeared? And that could be the same for the technology as well. But I think whether it was extraterrestrials or if it was an ancient human civilization, somewhere the technology was either lost, it was hidden, and so on. And the more and more I looked into it, the more and more I found that there were connections coming together from different parts of the world, which show again, this angle of how do we do it? How did they do it? And that was basically the challenge, I guess.
Right. Well, let's start with who these people possibly were. First of all, there's evidence that these megalithic structures and pyramids were a global phenomenon. So this must have been a global civilization that had access to each other's knowledge and building methods and construction methods and whatever technology was being used, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the big enigma in the whole story. It's one of these things where when you look at these stones, it's one of these things, all you can really say and see is that, well, how can you do it? How can it be done? And really, I think I'm not just saying this. I do think I have come to a fairly close angle to what the story is, but we need to find a way that where we could sort of parallel the technology, and then we would be able to understand it. But so far, we haven't been able to find even sort of a jot of the story, going back that long. We just sort of hit this brick wall, no pun.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I mean, let me give you sort of an example.
Yeah.
There's a place in the Middle East, Baalbek, and excuse me, and Baalbek is, as I said, located in the Middle East, and there are one particular area. There are these 4 gigantic tons. These 4 huge stones. Now, one of them weighs in at 1,650 tons. Now, that is, as far as we know at least, unless there are other stones further under the ground, what we know for sure is that particular stone in Baalbek is the oldest and the heaviest man-made or humanoid-made stone, and that could be built, and nobody today can do anything with it,
Right.
So now, I don't know if you've got a copy of the book.
Yes.
Itself. Yeah, but if you have a look on page, let me just tell you. Yeah, if you have a look on page 37, now there's a black and white picture on there, and on the right-hand side of the stone, you'll see someone just sitting, dangling their legs on the stone.
Right, I remember that one, yeah.
Yeah. Now, that's the heaviest and biggest stone. As I said, this one stands out at such an incredible weight, 1,650 tons. I mean, if you look at that picture, I mean, when the people have said, well, perhaps they pull them on ropes. Well, that doesn't give us any kind of answers at all. I mean, if you think about it, there's no evidence of, sort of track marks or anything like that on the ground. All around the area and below it as well. There's no evidence of these huge stones having been pulled along the ground. There's no scratch marks, where they would be pulling the stones along. And for all intents and purposes, what it actually seems to be is that those huge stones were lifted off the ground. Now, we don't know high or low, but I mean, for their purposes, I mean, you could make a good argument that they would really only need to raise the stones up about 10 or 15 feet, and according to the old legends, they could just push them along, kind of like a small boat on a lake, just keep pushing it like that. I mean, for us to see something like that would like, your jaw would just drop.
Right.
Yeah, but so somebody we know did achieve this. As I said, these Baalbek stones, we now have the remains. Well, not the remains because they're still intact, but we have 4 of them, roughly around about that time. That was the weight they were. But also, you've got the situation where they were obviously intent on doing something with the stones. Now, whether it was to push them along or put them in an erect situation, kind of building something huge like Stonehenge, where some of them would be horizontal, and others would be erected, so they may well have been trying to put together something like a Stonehenge type place, but on an incredible size.
Yeah.
But the most important thing is that this part of the story, it's not a fable or a legend. Any of us today can go to Baalbek and just stroll over to those stones and just ponder yourself, how on earth did that happen,
Right. Well, let's kind of look at each major step of construction for this. First, we have to find the stones and move them. What are the possibilities for the technology that we're using? I know one of the biggest theories out there is that we had the technology to manipulate sound and frequency to lift massive, heavy objects, right?
Well, yeah. Well, this really comes to something called acoustic levitation. And acoustic levitation is a technology which is actually now when I say it's in use, what I mean is that we can slightly achieve it, but we cannot really do it to any significant degree. I'll explain what I mean by that. Mm-hmm. Acoustic levitation, it's kind of like, if you've got two magnets and you push them against each other and they push themselves away from the other one, but you can't see anything, there's nothing solid in between the two. And it's kind of like that. And it comes down to, in that space, that there are abilities to insert something like a tiny stone, something like that. You can actually sort of elevate something very small, which would allow for something to sort of go in the air up to about 5 or 6 feet. But I mean, you might think, wow, that's great, but it's, when you compare that to the Baalbek stones, we're talking today about stones which are the size of like a quarter, or even less than a quarter, But there's a really good phrase that Larry Flaxman and Marie Jones, a friend of mine, they did some research into this about 4 years ago, and they came out with this really important and down to the ground statement. And I'll just read what Marie said. Yeah. The phenomenon is made of two opposing sound frequencies with interfering sound waves, thus creating a resonant zone that allows the levitation to occur. Theoretically, to move a levitating object, simply change or alter the two sound waves and tweak accordingly. So in other words, yes, we can do this, and it has been done, but it's not really particularly spectacular. And right now, most people, sort of are just, well, okay, well, what are we going to do with something that's just the sign of a nickel? The answer is there's really not much we can do. We can achieve acoustic levitation, which is at the thrust of the book, but we just cannot find a way that will sort of increase the size, the power, and the ability. And that's the problem. We've kind of hit the wall. And from now, that the key is to find out how we do take the next step. But the important thing is that all around the world, we've got examples of these stones, these massive stones, and nobody really has been able to figure out, the ones in the UK with Stonehenge, the ones at Baalbek, South America, and so on. And everybody has got the kind of like the scenario, okay, we get it, but nobody has been able to put it into place, like I said, beyond the size of a small coin. And And a small coin isn't really going to do anything other than just say, "Oh, well, that's a bit of fun," you know.
Right. Yeah.
And that's about it.
Yeah, a little magic trick. Yeah. So when we're looking at something of this gargantuan size and however many hundreds or thousands of tons, what are the theories on how they can use sound as a technology to do this?
The usage, do you mean?
What's that?
The usage of it, you
Yes,
mean? The
yes.
use of it. Yeah. Well, I think the key thing probably would have been for buildings and just gigantic, massive buildings. I mean, if you look at for example, the pyramids in Egypt, the key main ones. I mean, some of those are sort of, in multi-tons. And you imagine not just moving one of those stones on the desert of Giza in Egypt. If you've got, say, let's say just 4 tons, and you have got to haul those 4-ton stones not across roads, not across highways, not with wheels. Somehow it's got to be moved off the sand itself. I mean, you think about that. That would be so difficult. I mean, if you just put the stones on the ground, to some degree, they're going to, at least they're going to fall into the sand. Then you've got to find a way to start pulling it out of the sand. And then if you look at the pictures of the main pyramid and the Great Pyramid, and if you look at that, then think to yourself, wow, we've got at the very top, how on earth did they get that top stone? Which is, foot after foot after foot after foot. The pyramids, the key ones, they're huge. So how do you put that top stone on there? Nobody has figured that out at all. And again, for me at least, anti-gravity, under the term of acoustic levitation, for me is the sort of the prime angle for getting an answer. But I think there's another part of the story that is the one that we haven't really found any of the technology, and I think I've sort of brought this up earlier, but to expand on it, I think that possibly that the technology could have been hidden, because to be able to achieve this thing, this technology, why, for example, would it have now be gone? Now, on one hand, you could say, well, if it was sort of hidden, well, who hid it and why? And then you've got the other side of it, that there was a catastrophe or something along those lines. But at some point, what the technology they had to achieve this, for some reason, it went away. It was either broken down, it was hidden, or it was lost. And that, for me at least, suggests another part of history that we don't know. We're missing a part of history as to why we had all that technology, and then, say, 1,000 years after, we didn't have it. And there was a reason for that, I think.
Right, yeah. Now, there are some researchers that believe this was somehow done, the moving of these massive blocks was somehow done by water. But one of the things you just recently mentioned, it seems that would be impossible, is, putting the top stones as high as they are using water. I think that would be quite impossible. What would you say to people that think they're using things like water locks to build these?
Well, things like that aren't. It's not impossible, to move stones. But again, if you've got something, let's say 10 tons or 15 tons, not only are you going to have to build the stones, but then you've got to get the stones. I mean, then you've got to create something even bigger that you can put on the stone. Not only have you got to make this huge stone, you've got to make like a huge boat to put it on the water. So, you're sort of adding even more sort of huge rocks and stones, and then you've got all the wood, to push the boxes or whatever they're using, down the river or the lake, that kind of thing. But again, you're just adding more and more, to the problem, if you like, of what you're having to do. So I'm not really that sort of for that particular scenario, and I'll give you a reason why. If you look at, for example, with Stonehenge, now I think probably for most people, everybody knows of Stonehenge, and most people know what Stonehenge looks like. It's just a huge stone circle, and there's a lot of stone circles around the UK. A lot of people don't know that there are in excess of 100 UK stone circles, but some of them are actually only the size of like your front door. Some are just small ones, and some are bigger. But Stonehenge itself is the biggest one in the UK. Now, what's really intriguing, people have said, well, Stonehenge isn't that big, so maybe they could sort of use ropes and hauls and things like that to pull all the stones up and that kind of thing. But there is a problem with that theory, and I'll tell you what it is. Now, Stonehenge itself is situated in the English county of Wiltshire, and that is in the south of England. And we know to some degree that they were probably built round about 8,000 years ago, something along those lines. And we know to some degree from studying the stones themselves. Now, this would be okay and perhaps a little bit easier to do at Stonehenge, you might say. But what a lot of people don't know is that most of the stones that were built to make Stonehenge were actually not from the ground in that area. And I'll explain what I mean by that. A lot of the stones that were used to make Stonehenge were not even created and stoned and chopped around to the right right form. They actually didn't come from England. They came from Wales. And in the UK, there's England, Scotland, Wales. They comprise the land part of the UK. Now, most of those stones that were built to make Stonehenge came from a group of mountains in Wales called the Preseli Mountains. Now, the Preseli Mountains, so you got the Preseli Mountains is where the stone came from, and it was taken to Stonehenge to make Stonehenge. But the important thing is that the Preseli Mountains are 141 miles from Stonehenge, and we know with 100% certainty that those stones were taken from the Preseli Mountains, these giant stones, to make Stonehenge. But the big problem is, how do you drag huge stones from the Preseli Mountains across 141 miles and take not on roads or anything like that? What we're actually doing or seeing is these stones being, well, as the scientists would say, is that, well, they're just dragging them. But there's no way you could carry or move these stones in a just a normal fashion of hauling hauling stones across the Priscilla Mountains for 141 miles. It just wouldn't, it might be more feasible by making sort of wheels and things on the ground. Yeah. But you imagine trying to do that sort of 500 feet up a mountain, and the stone itself is like 20 tons. I mean, again, it just gets almost like a farce, to come up with some of these ideas and these scenarios.
Right now is the most critical time for us to take back control of our food supply and become self-reliant by having our very own food forest. Transform your yard into a food forest and create a system of self-reliance that's easy and enjoyable with our friends at Food Forest Abundance. No matter where you're starting from, you can become more self-reliant. You can take your self-reliance to the next level by becoming a producer of your own food through growing and foraging. Learn how to turn your property into an income-producing source of economic self-reliance. If you're ready to go off-grid, click the link in the description and use coupon code FORBIDDEN for discounts on your very own food forest with Food Forest Abundance. And you were speaking earlier about how we do have just such little evidence from our ancient past. It seems like everything was either hidden or destroyed. But in your book, you write about a 9th century story of a mysterious papyrus with the power to move large stones at the Giza necropolis. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yes. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one because the stories that surround it when what we would call sorcerers and things like that had the ability themselves to levitate, which would be pretty cool if you could do that, Yeah. But, there's actually quite a few legends and stories like that where, the wizard, the sorcerers, those people, they themselves, again, had this ability. And you can find them in those old sort of legends and stories that you just mentioned. And when you listen to these stories, again, you're dealing with something like acoustic levitation, or that is acoustic levitation. And in some of those cases, not in everyone, but in a lot of them, it was achieved when some of the other people in the buildings, when they were saying that it was achieved through some of the magicians and so on, did it by singing or music or whistling. Now, I don't think at all that she would make that or accept that literal. But what it all comes down to over the centuries is that the ancients were using sound to achieve something. And of course, you would expect things to be sort of mutated and changed over the centuries, or actually over millennia as well. And you can see why something like a whistle and somebody singing or playing music, over the centuries, that would be, sort of altered from what the originally was. It was sound, and the people of that era lost, as I said, the stories of the technology, and what originally was acoustic levitation was sort of crumbled into legends of music and of sound and whistling and things like that. And again, that you put that together, and that also sort of demonstrates a form of acoustics. And coming back to sound, but the old stories have never really been sort of achieved, to say how we can put the old stories together with the scientific world of today.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that you wrote about a Mayan story of the construction of the Pyramid of the Magician that was said to have been overseen by a small humanoid who could whistle large stones into place, like you were just saying, and as well as Native American stories of ancient priests being able to, quote unquote, make stones light or easier to move, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's another really interesting part of the story. There's a lot of these stories where the stones were made light. It was as literally that you could move them. Now, in the old legends, that is pretty much how it's said. But what we don't have is a full understanding, or the original papers or the documents that that ancient man possibly had. But that's one of the things we don't know, is how is it these stones can be made light, and made so light that it'd be kind of like a balloon, like a toy balloon. You just sort of put your hand under it and then hit it into the sky. You can do that all day long, playing with a balloon, and that really would be the parallel to this. You've got something. I mean, you went out into a field and you saw out there a huge balloon. You could still push it along because it's just a balloon. But the secret, or the issue of how do you make stone light, that admittedly is one of the key issues. Either that is the direct story, or the levitation itself, the acoustic levitation itself is sort of making a way to allow for those huge stones to become light. And again, although I think that is the answer, and there are significant enough data to make that case. However, I think the problem is we're still at that sort of shut door, when it comes to understanding correctly, as how that can be done. But again, if somebody back then could really find a way to make the stones light, that would be amazing. But I cannot think of another scenario. And if that was the answer, I mean, you think about it, that say 8,000 years ago, the people of this planet were able to achieve things that we cannot do in the 22nd century, 21st century, and probably into the 22nd century, if we're not careful, if we don't find the answers.
Yeah, it sure doesn't seem like we've made that many strides in our technological advances since then. And there's so many different aspects of this besides the lifting of stones and moving of stones of extreme heavy weight. We have cutting, precise cutting and drilling. It seems that we've had this technology that we can't even do these precise cuts or drills today, right?
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. You're totally right. I mean, everything in this story is, it's fascinating because, we've got something in the past which was incredible, and then we've got a time when there was nothing, and then after that, we've got now where things are starting to change and become understandable. And what we really need, I think, we need to go from, we know the stories and the legends and things like that. We know those kind of things, so we know what was done. and right now we don't have enough of the technology to do what was done in Baalbek or in Egypt or in Stonehenge. So what we want is the central part, and the central part is to find out how what they did that can now be achieved by us. So that's what we want. We need that middle part, and the middle part is finding the technology. And now, if one of the interesting things is if the words that were said about how the stones could be made light, that might be the reason why we haven't found any sort of ancient technology which would need or would allow or need for this to happen, to raise these gigantic stones. We haven't found like a sort of, a levitator device, like the size of a bus or something like that.
Mm.
And that's one of the things I talk about in the book, is the issue of why is it, if they were able to achieve all of this, why is it we haven't found any old like rusty technology, that was created to do this? And I talk about in the book about how there's a possibility maybe there wasn't any technology. Maybe it was just something really simple that we haven't understood. Kind of like when I said, like with a toy balloon, you don't really need much technology. All you got to do is push it with your hand, and then when you pop the balloon, you'll never see it again. There's no evidence of it. And I think it could be something like that, that the technology could actually have been really similar, but it's also simple.
Yes.
That's a possibility. I think we're missing. It's almost like the eyes and the woods and the trees kind of scenario, and I think that could be a significant possibility. The idea that it may not have needed gigantic, metallic things clanking around the landscape to move all this. It could be a case of just moving the stones in a fashion that, like when we talked about Marie Jones and Larry Flaxman, when they made a really good scenario when they talked about, with magnets pushing against each other. There's actually no technology. You just you've got the magnets around, and yes, you're moving the stone up, but there's actually no specific device that's raising these little stones, So that is probably the stumbling block on our side, because I think that the technology probably doesn't exist anymore, because it was so simple. Just like as Marie said, it's just magnets, and all you really need is the space in the magnet, and the space doesn't have anything. It's just space,
Yeah. Well, let's go back and spend a little time on who or what these people could possibly have been. Of course, especially lately, there's been speculation on ancient aliens, that these may not have even been humans. We do have evidence of the global civilization and near megalithic structures, that there have been elongated skulls found that don't fit your traditional humanoid DNA, and there has been some anomalies in the scientific testing, and of course giant bones. And there's been speculation that, well, wouldn't it be easier to move these giant stones if humans were a lot bigger as well? So what do you think about that? Do you think that's possible, that we had just different types of humanoids that existed at the time, that may have had different types of abilities and technologies?
Well, yeah. I mean, again, I sort of talk about that in the book. The sort of the alien angle versus the human angle. And but I also, in the book, I admit, that I'm not entirely sure who, these people, these entities were, and that's why, I talk about aliens, I talk about ancient humans, and I also, in the book, I refer to, whoever did this as the levitators, and for me, it's somewhere in that category. Now, is it extraterrestrials? Well, I mean, it could be. Now, but one of the things that's always sort of intrigued me when people say, this was all done by extraterrestrials. Well, one of the things I always wonder is, if they're from another world, why do they spend so much time way back then on our planet? So, for me, there's one just sort of really simple angle. The reasons why there's so many of those, the levitators spend so much time on our planet is because it's also their planet,
Right.
because they've always lived there. That's one of the things that, don't get me wrong, I do a lot of these stories, like things like Baalbek, but also, and things like, when you've got ancient biblical stories and things like that, Sodom and Gomorrah, which sounds just like, those cities were nuked. That's exactly how it sounds. But does that mean just because somebody was using nukes, say 10,000 years ago, that doesn't mean they were extraterrestrials? It just could be that there was a very ancient but highly high-tech civilizations of humanoids. And when I say humanoids, I don't mean they just look like us. I mean civilization that lived on our planet because it was they lived there as well, or possibly that it was perhaps all these stories of ancient aliens and the gods and so on coming down. It could well have been that way back when there was just a civilization of human levitators, and there were no aliens. It's possible there were no aliens. It could just have been ancient humans of an extremely incredible understanding of technology. Or it could have been both. It could have been humans aside aliens, or it could have been just aliens, and the humans just stood there with their mouth wide out, as they watched these stones being moved here and there. But I'm more inclined to go with an ancient. Personally, I'm more inclined to go along with like an ancient human civilization. But it's a lot of people, when I say that, a lot of people don't like that. They're like, well, we want to hear about ancient aliens and things like that. I said, well, I can only say, what I can find,
Yeah, one of the things about that really interests me, and I've been looking into a lot lately, you have a lot of guests that have a lot of theories on this, is the crypto-terrestrial, that aliens are here, they've been here. Maybe they exist in a different density or state that we can't perceive with our vision. Maybe they know how to manipulate a new state of matter, and that's where all these abilities come from, and they can phase in and out of our existence, or we just can't perceive them. But I love the thought that, the aliens, what we think are coming from outer space, have probably always been here, just existing in a state that we can't perceive them.
Yeah, that's a good point. I talked about what the late Mac Tonis referred to as the crypto-terrestrials, and for your listeners, Mac wrote a really good book before his death about 10 years ago, called The Crypto-Terrestrials, and he actually does make a really good, solid case as to how and why there could have been an ancient humanoid civilization on our planet, which essentially sort of runs along parallel to us, and that possibly they could sort of possibly even integrate into our civilization, that might be looking somewhat close to us, to the point where, you know, if you're sort of going out late at night and you see this guy, you know, with sort of like a trench coat and a hat and with his head down, you probably wouldn't notice certain specific differences, and that's how Mac kind of sort of explained things, that there could be sort of a fairly human civilization hiding out within our civilization, which was sounds kind of sort of sinister, you know, the idea of a human civilization that's slightly different to us. They kind of look slightly different as well, and for thousands of years they've been sort of sort of moving around within our civilization and being very careful to avoid that they never find us, and so we never find them, because it's a situation where you've got this secret civilization, and like I say, it is a little bit creepy, you know, where they're sort of infiltrating our civilization, and they can do it just by, you know, perhaps, and there are stories like this, you know, a lot of people where people have said they'd seen these strange creatures, and they look just like us, and you could tell they were wearing wigs and makeup, and their faces looked kind of different, but it was close enough. So, and Mac also talked about how, you know, this civilization, the crypto-terrestrials, as he called them, you know, he really did make a great case, you know, for why there could have been this ancient civilization and how they could hide from us for thousands of years. So maybe my levitators in my book could be Max the crypto-terrestrials in Mac's book, if you see what I mean. So.
Yeah, man, I love that. Now, while we're on kind of the extraterrestrial topic, I want to get your thoughts on what has been happening with the Pentagon, the mainstream U.S. media, the government, and all the sudden interest in talk. I mean, we had the Pentagon saying that they honestly don't think that there are human occupants in these ships, which, I mean, I think a lot of it is a deception, because I think a lot of what they're showing us is our own military drones and reverse engineered, possibly, craft. So there's a lot of deception going on there, I personally believe, but I want to get your thoughts on what the possibilities are with this.
Well, actually, I'm glad you said that, because, I mean, you know, it's important when people see weird things in the sky and stuff like that, you know, and these craft and so on, you know, and now the term UFO or unidentified flying object, you know, people are talking about UAPs and things like that. Now, you know, the way I look at it is, what we have to remember first is the fact that our technology is developing, you know, very quickly, but, and it is an important but, there's the fact that just because somebody sees a really weird, strange-looking craft in the sky, that doesn't automatically mean it's being flown by little green men or little grey men, you know.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that does happen. You know, this angle of seeing something weird in the sky and then immediately having to think or conclude it has to be something paranormal or from another world. That's nonsense. You know, I mean, if you think about it, or if you look at the history, I mean, when back in the late 1980s, when the stealth bomber and the stealth fighter plane, when they came out, you know, these two really strange looking aircraft, you know, these black triangle type craft, the bomber and the fighter. Now, a lot of people don't know, but the prototypes of the stealth bomber and of the stealth fighter, they were actually being worked on, and prototype versions were flying around at Area 51 back in 1975. That's when they first started, in 1975. And the stealth bomber and the stealth fighter was not reeled out of the hangar also until the late 1980s. So I think what we are seeing, they are UFOs in one sense. They're unidentified, they're flying, and they're objects. But that doesn't mean there's little grey men inside with black eyes, you know, coming to take away your DNA or whatever.
Right. Yeah, exactly, man. I love it. Now, for the last few minutes we have, I want to get back to the possibilities with the construction of megalithic sites and pyramids. What do you think about the possibilities that our ancient ancestors had profound consciousness abilities and psychic abilities and abilities to manipulate large stones, possibly not only with sound, but intent and our own consciousness abilities?
Well, I mean, that's another side of it as well. I mean, I haven't personally looked into that to any significant aspect. But what I would say is that if what you just said then, you know, is part of it, that again would help us understand why there are no huge mechanical devices, you know, like the equivalent of like a lumbering crane or something like that. You know, what you just said would be another example as to how we wouldn't find anything, any technology and machines, because it wasn't needed. And like you said, what you just said sort of demonstrates another way, if you like, as to why we wouldn't need or ever find, you know, actual technology, but we would find something that was just so easy, you know, if we could just understand it.
Well, right now we're in a time where independent researchers are making some amazing discoveries, and they're changing what mainstream academia had us believe for the longest time. But mainstream academia still is holding on tightly to these old ideals that don't work anymore, these old timelines that don't work anymore, and these old theories about construction of these megalithic sites and who these people were. They don't work anymore either. So we have these amazing independent researchers right now that are doing all these amazing discoveries. You think modern academia will ever take any of that seriously?
I think so. I think that the problem is, you know, we need to find somebody who can actually put something into place, and we can see a stone, you know, that's 20 tons, and we can see it levitate, and everybody can stand there, you know, sort of with their eyes wide open and their mouth falling out, you know. Yeah. That almost really did. And this is sort of, I mean, if we got a few more minutes, you know, we've got the... Yeah, okay. We've got the story of Ed Leeds Skalnin. Now, Ed was a citizen of Latvia, and he moved to the United States, to Florida, and he created this facility called Coral Castle.
Yeah, it's amazing. I've been there.
Yeah. Now, Ed was like a fascinating guy. He was one of these sort of almost like an alternative scientist, you know, and almost like a mad professor, you know.
Yeah.
And And he was someone who said that he had found alternative ways to allow him to move around stones. And Coral Castle, which is a great place to go to, it's still there, and you can go to Coral Castle and see how Ed built on his own these huge structures that multi-tonned, and he would do it overnight. And then, his friends had come over the next morning, and there'd be like an 8-ton stone, just standing in the doorway or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'll just read for you a statement that Ed himself made before he died. He said, I'm quoting now, "I have discovered the secrets of the pyramids and have found out how the Egyptians and the ancient builders in Peru, Yucatan, and Asia, with only primitive tools, raised and set in place blocks of stone weighing many tons." Now, that is sort of, again, it doesn't involve technology. What it does involve, something that, again, we're not seeing, the tree and the woods, and I think if Ed had not sort of died young and his life kind of went down, he probably would have gone further. But Ed's story is a perfect example of how he could have been achieved what he did. Maybe we could have actually achieved it just 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, a bit more than that. But Ed is an example of someone who I think has penetrated the mystery, and I think he's one of the key figures in the story.
Yeah, man, I love that story. And this is fascinating, Nick. We're going to have to definitely have you back on in the future. Is there anything that you're working on now that you might want to give us a little teaser about?
Well, yeah. I mean, actually, the next book I've got coming out, you can see the cover of the book at least on Amazon, because it's not out yet. It'll be out around about January, February. It's a book all about robots. And the sort of the history of robots to the present day, to the future, and how robots, how will they impact on us in the future, and will the whole issue of robots in the future, will it be a good thing, or will it be, a bad thing, or somewhere in between? Will it be iRobot, or will it be the Terminator?
Yeah. Oh, man, I love it. We'll definitely have to have you back on to discuss that. Thank you so much, Nick. That was fantastic.
Well, thanks, man. And I'm glad that we were finally able to get the tech all back to normal.
Yes, that was excellent. And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We will be talking again tomorrow. We'll see y'all then.